First and foremost, thank you so much for being here. Something that I've talked about on the podcast recently is how important it is to manage our inputs. And to such a large extent, our inputs determine our outputs. So if we are putting in information that helps us make better decisions, that helps us be more mature, more rational, more health focused, then we make better choices. And if our inputs are true crime dramas or reality TV, we're just not focusing on that quality of input that's going to drive quality output. It's not that there's anything wrong with reality TV or true crime podcasts or any of the other kind of information lighter stuff, though true crime isn't necessarily light. There's nothing wrong with that. But the more that we can emphasize quality input, the better off we're going to be in terms of the quality of our decisions. So I say that just to give you credit for being here. The way that we're going to do this is I'm going to start first by talking about some of the big issues that we are facing with consistency. Then I want to break down the consistency code. I want to talk about a few really important mindset shifts you're going to need to make for the sake of consistency. And then I want to answer your questions. All right. There's a ton I want to talk about. It's easy to go down a million rabbit holes. We're going to move quick, but I am recording this. So if we are able to capture that, I will for sure share it with you. One challenge I always like to give people, including myself in webinars, is for the next hour, try not to multitask. Try to be here. Try, as uncomfortable as it is, to put your cell phone down, to not check the Facebook notification or the email that just came in, not fold the laundry. Here's why. And even if you've heard me say this before, sometimes we get in the habit of dismissing things that aren't novel, that aren't new information, because yeah, I know that, I've heard that. But there's something new in every piece of information we receive, even if it's not new. So I want to challenge you to just keep in mind that even when we are giving something our full attention, even when we only retain about 30%. So even if you're fully locked in on this, you're only going to retain about 30%. If your attention is divided because you're checking that Facebook notification or you're scrolling on Instagram, then you might take 30%, or I'm sorry, 3%, 5%, maybe 10% generously, and you might miss out on something that could make your journey that much easier, that much faster. So the email will be there when we're done. You can check the Facebook notifications or the Instagram in an hour. I just want you to challenge yourself, if for no other reason, for the practice of focus, to be here with me. And the other reminder I want to throw out there is this is your time. Ask questions. If I say something and it's not clear, ask for clarification. If you have a question that's tangentially related to something we're talking about, ask a question. Though I might not stop mid-sentence and get to it, I do have the Q&A pulled up. And before we sign off, I will address questions. So please, you are so welcome to ask anything. There's nothing that's an annoyance. There's nothing that's a bother. There's nothing that's silly or that you should know. The competitive advantage that we all can give ourselves is being really bold in our willingness to ask for help. All right, let's start with some of the problems that can get in the way of consistency. One of the big ones is that information is outpacing implementation. And what that really means is that in this day and age where it is so wonderful to freely have access to all of this information in books and podcasts and expert accounts on social media and articles, all of these different things, documentaries, it can be very overwhelming. Not only that, most of us, and you might be a unicorn, and if you are, like, I want to talk to you and I want to know your process. Most of us are not disciplined in making sure we give as much time to implementation as we do to information. Let's just give an example. Let's say that you read a book. Let's use Chasing Cupcakes as an example. I would say that 99% of us do not challenge ourselves to block out equal time as the time we spent reading the book to implementing the ideas, right? And really, we need more time for implementation than information, but we're so skewed toward information at the expense of implementation. And what happens when we have all of this access to information, but we aren't disciplined in blocking that time and honoring that time to implement as much as, and ideally more, as we consume information, what happens? We feel overwhelmed. We feel pressure. And on top of that, there's this false sense of progress because learning feels productive in a lot of ways. I gave you guys credit for being here tonight, and I mean that, and that is genuine. However, it's not going to move the needle in the way of results for you, the way that you might be looking for results in your life. So we have to really keep in mind that while information is amazing and it is valuable and it is so special that we live in this time where we can freely access information, the problem is when the information outpaces implementation, and that sense that we have of overwhelm, of pressure, and of false progress is a reflection of the imbalance in our lives between implementation and information. And we're going to talk about a way to overcome that tonight. Another big problem is that we're chasing what we think will deliver results without considering whether or not that thing is right for us. And there's so many examples I can think of in my own weight loss journey where I tried something only because I thought that it might lead toward rapid weight loss, and not at all because it was the right thing for my lifestyle, for my preferences, for my desires. So often we're just like, oh, well, could that possibly work? Oh, somebody is building their business this way and they're saying that it works. I should do that, without slowing down and stepping back and saying, but is that how I want to do it? Because if it's not how I want to do it, then I'm probably not going to stick with it long term. How many times have you maybe done some sort of workout plan because it seems like it's getting people great results, but it doesn't align at all with your interests or your passion or what you enjoy doing? We're chasing what we think is going to deliver us results without ever considering if it is right for us or if it's not. And that is a major barrier and issue. Are you overvaluing speed of results at the expense of sustainability of results? This is a huge one, a really major pitfall that I see so many people getting in. If they think it's going to get them results fast, they don't even care if it fits their lifestyle. Before I got married the first time, I remember doing this diet where I basically ate white fish, 1 tomato, and 1 apple a day. And you better believe I lost weight really fast. I mean, like almost as fast as like amputating limbs, but I put the weight back on as fast as I lost it because never in a million years was I going to maintain that lifestyle of just eating white fish, a tomato, and an apple every single day. I undoubtedly was overvaluing speed at the expense of sustainability. This is why there are people who are lifelong dieters. Because of this very thing, they're overvaluing speed at the expense of sustainability. And so they lose a little weight, they put it back on. Maybe they lose a little more weight, they put it back on. They're just attracted to what they think is going to work or what they hope is going to work without slowing down to really consider, does that work for my lifestyle and what I want and what I'm interested in? Another big problem. I just talked about this last night inside the consistency course. One thing that is really keeping us from consistency is conflating the idea of consistency and the idea of perfection. And we label or we interpret consistency as perfection. So if we didn't do the thing we said we do, oh, we screwed up. We dropped the ball. We might as well now XYZ because we missed the mark. Consistency is about patterns, not about perfection. And labeling it perfection in many, many cases is this subconscious way of letting yourself off the hook. Nicolette just commented and said, I have a continuous problem with saying no to free food by justifying it with reasons like, I won't have extra dishes to do, my groceries will last longer, even if I see the error of my ways time after time. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this notion of, have you ever seen a horror movie? We're going to get to it, but just to kind of jump ahead since Nicolette brought it up, when you're watching a horror movie and they run up the stairs when the murderer or whatever comes into the house and you're like, oh my gosh, don't run upstairs. Nicolette, in your example, you're continuing to be that person running upstairs, right? You know that this doesn't end well. Here you go, running upstairs again. That is one of the things that I'm really passionate about talking about. We're going to overcome that with a number of tools I'm going to introduce you to tonight. And that's really what we do inside the consistency course, but we just do it in a more like coaching way versus a way that we'll do tonight, which is introducing strategies and tools. So with that understanding of some of the problems that keep us from consistency, let's talk about the consistency code. The consistency code. The most important part of the consistency code is this first step, which is defining what done looks like. Now, I'm going to use a business example here. I'll also use an example around food and weight loss because I have seen this show up and the problems from this show up in my life. A lot of times somebody will start a business and they're like, yeah, I'm building my business. I'm building my business. And 10 years later, they're building their business. And 15 years later, they're building their business because they didn't start with the idea of what done looks like. And if they did start with the idea of what done looks like, it would be a lot easier to make decisions as they went, and they wouldn't constantly feel attracted to like, oh, I should try that. Oh, I should try that, because they could put it through this filter of what done looks like. If I started my business with the notion of what done looks like, I can guarantee you that at least 50% of the things I did in business, I never would have done because they wouldn't have aligned with that vision of how I wanted it to be at the end. Now, when it comes to weight, the only thing I ever thought about was done looks like losing 100 plus pounds. And whatever it's going to take to get me to lose 100 plus pounds, that's what I want to do. But the insanity of that is that I was doing something only for weight loss without the consideration of how I wanted my relationship with food or my relationship with movement to look long-term. And so as soon as I got results, I stopped, or I might not have even gotten results long-term because it wasn't something I was willing to sustain. I wasn't willing to sustain eating white fish and an apple and a tomato. And if any of you guys try that, you're like banned from any of my trainings ever again, because that is just the worst way to support your body. So don't do it. It is terrible for your metabolism, for your hormones, for your mental health. Don't do it. If I started my weight loss journey from the standpoint of what does done look like? I was somebody, to just be very, very honest and transparent with you, when I weighed over 350 pounds, I would binge eat on a regular basis. I might have some days that looked super, super clean, right? Like fitness model clean, where I'd have egg whites for breakfast, scrambled with some like non-stick chemicals only, no calorie cooking spray. And then I might have a salad with grilled fish for lunch, and I would have an apple for a snack. I had some days that looked like that, but I had a lot of days that looked very different. I had a lot of days that looked like eating pretty well all day and binging all night. I had a lot of days that looked like a get it out of my system free for all, and I'll eat anything that's not nailed down to quote, get it out of my system and start fresh tomorrow, or go on some strict plan the next day. And if at that point I said, what does done look like? And got really clear on what I wanted my ideal relationship with food to look like for life. And then I took the next step that we'll talk about in a minute. I would not have been attracted to so many different ridiculous gimmicks that I tried, because I would know that they weren't going to move the needle and get me where I wanted to go. I don't know how many of you experience this, but I certainly have. And I have a ton of clients who feel like they're always distracted by the next shiny thing. Oh, well, I read this book that said I should eat like this, or I should do this intermittent fasting thing, or I should maybe try carnivore, or I should do one meal a day, or maybe I should do keto, or maybe it seems like it would would be really, really easy to count calories. And then if I wanted to have cake, I could have cake as long as I made it fit within my calories. And people are just jumping from one plan to the next plan. If you have this clarity around what done looks like, so much of that will just not appeal to you because that's not aligned with what works for me. Like, when I think about what some of my friends and my colleagues do for health and fitness, even though I'm really excited for them and their results, I don't feel the need to jump on their plan and follow their protocol because it very simply doesn't fit through the filter of what done looks like for me, the end point I'm trying to get through. And it's the same way with business for me. As a business owner, I am inundated with different strategies, and you need to be doing this and you need to be using this. What protects me from being pulled in all of those different directions is having this clarity around what done looks like. There are a million business strategies that could drive results for me that I will never do because they don't align with what done looks like. Heidi said, I relate to what you're saying about what does done look like. I'd like to apply this concept to what does maintenance look like? Well, and that's really the same thing, right? You're using a different word in maintenance, but like essentially, if we're talking about food, we're saying, how do I want to eat for the rest of my life? Right. And then the next step that we take is breaking that down and segmenting that into many different phases. And I do not mean 2 phases, 3 phases. I do not mean 10 phases. I mean more like 30, 40, 50 phases, depending on the degree of variation between where you are now and done. The reason that I pulled up this image, and I'll take credit for this image came from Google Images. It is not mine. Disclaimer, disclaimer. The reason that I say that is because let's say that I was the version of me that was 350 pounds and I was going to Chick-fil-A every day and I was binging multiple times every single week. And when I would go out to eat, I would have a drink and the bread basket and an entree. And then we might stop for ice cream on the way home. And I established like, this is the vision that I have of who I want to be with food and what specifically that is going to look like. And the key there is you have to be specific, 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 specific. You think you've been specific enough? Nope, you haven't. Go back, get more specific. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to take this step of breaking it down into phases. If I just said, oh, okay, well, I'll start by eating clean for breakfast, that might be too big of a change. And I love this image because can you make those big leap changes? Yeah. But like this image so beautifully shows, building on it will probably be slower because you're just going to have a harder time getting it to stick. Whereas if you break your ideal vision down into 40 pieces, and that's an arbitrary number, the first one is so small that you can really get into a rhythm with it really quickly. And just as the rungs on the right ladder show, when the steps are smaller, you can climb them more quickly. When the steps are bigger, and everybody is attracted to these big sweeping changes because so many of us have this narrative in our heads that some changes are too small to make a difference, but it's so wrong. And this visual describes it perfectly. When I first started, many of you have heard this a million times before. My first step was a smaller fast food order at Chick-fil-A. Okay. There is no such thing as a change that is too small to make a difference. And the smaller the change, the more confidence you likely have in your ability to make it, and the more quickly you can build on it. So you're going to segment your vision of done into phases. And I'll just reiterate that in order to do this, you have to be dramatically more specific than you've ever been before, and so specific that it's probably going to be uncomfortable. Okay. Kathy just commented, she said, like you, done always felt like losing a certain amount of weight, but really done is a healthy and active lifestyle. Boom. She said, I am locked in with good eating and getting more active. So can I consider myself done? I don't know. I don't know what your ideal lifestyle is. That's the work that you have to do, right? If you say getting more and more active, then that tells me you're still in a progression. So what you have to do, Kathy, is that first step of what does done look like? Saying healthy and active lifestyle is about 100 miles away from as specific as you need to be. That's why I was just saying, like, you have to be so specific, it is uncomfortable. Saying done is a healthy and active lifestyle is the tippity top of generalities, to the point that it's not useful, because you can't segment it out and you can't break it out. You have to say, okay, well, what does that look like? And then you're probably going to throw out 3 or 4 disclaimers or 3 or 4 descriptors. No. I want you to script it for me. Here are 5 example days. Here are the things I do and the things I don't do. Here's the way I think and the way I don't think. Like, it has to be painfully specific. And healthy, active lifestyle is not in the universe of as specific as it needs to be. Angela said, I just listened to episode 816 on patience, which was awesome, but it is more about never being done. For the rest of my life, I will care about and invest in my health. That is who and how I choose to be. I love that. And I think that it is not specific enough for this process. I tell my clients, I mean, for those that are on here, I know I have some consistency course clients in here. What do I say in terms of specificity? Is that something that I say like multiple times? I feel like I say it almost every day. Specificity is a superpower. And the more specific you are, as you get more specific, what you do is you move yourself closer to the solution. You have to get more specific. Carrie says, thank you for bringing up the smaller steps. I started this today because of your Zoom call last night. I thought of what done looks like. My goal for today was to take an actual lunch and walk for 30 minutes. I can sustain this. That's amazing. I love that. I absolutely love that. All right. Let's move on to this. I'm just making sure I got to the questions. Okay. The next step in the consistency code is to create a feedback loop. Let me explain to you what that is and why it's important. Have you ever heard the phrase, this is important, y'all. If you are on Facebook, checking notifications, checking emails, I want to encourage you, come back. And if you get any part of this, this is a really important part that I don't want you to miss out on. Have you ever heard that phrase, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me? I love that. And essentially what it's saying is like, if Tanya, if you scammed me and swindled money out of me the first time, like, I trusted you, that's on you. But if you come back, Tanya, and 30 days later or 3 days later, you scam me again and you swindle me out of money again, that's on me, right? I didn't learn my lesson. That's on me. Now, why do I bring this up? Because you're the scammer. Because in my life, I've been the scammer. How many times did I fall for this one thing won't hurt? Oh, I'll do better tomorrow. I deserve it. I don't want to miss out, right? We then go through the like, why did I do that? That wasn't worth it. I should have known better. I should have made a different decision. We are literally doing the same crazy thing every single time. We are the shame on me one. So we have to put something in place so that we don't continue to get scammed every single time, right? It's like, if you know you always run upstairs in the horror movie, what are you going to do differently so that you don't continue to fall for that thing? I think years ago, I talked about this in the podcast and saying like, if somebody jumps out from behind a door every time you walk into your bedroom, at some point, aren't you going to like stop being startled by it? We have to put something in place for this, for our tendency, our pattern, our habit, our default response of talking ourselves out of our consistency. You need to create a feedback loop. I shared on the podcast where this came from for me most recently was in a course that I was taking. And I recognized we all have patterns. We all have tendencies. We're not bad. We're not dumb. We're not, gullible. We're just not putting things in place to help us. And one of my patterns when taking a course is that I would have really high motivation going into it, and I would be really excited about the results I was going to create for myself. And then I would feel like I got a little behind. Maybe I lost a little bit of drive, a little motivation, and then a little bit behind turns into I'll catch up later. I didn't catch up. Now I feel disappointed in myself. And before I know it, I'm totally disengaged. A lot of times it's because I got confused or I had a question and I got frustrated. And instead of facing that frustration head on, I'm just like, I can't do this, right? This isn't for me. And I see that pattern in my own clients. When some people, what happens is they get overwhelmed and they start to feel doubtful in their ability to make progress, and they'll turn it on me, which it's fine. I'm totally ready for it. And like, this isn't what I thought it would be. We need to respond intelligently, knowing our own patterns. And that's by creating a feedback loop. So what I did when I recently went into a course is I said, knowing my tendency that if I get a little behind or I get confused, I get frustrated, I feel defeated, and then I'm done. What am I going to put in place? How am I going to create a feedback loop to overcome that pattern? And what it looked like for me was creating on my calendar time for, starting in the upper right, consuming the information. I blocked it out on my calendar. That meant like twice a week we had live coaching calls. Those were on my calendar, but also watching the videos and the modules outside of class so I could stay caught up. That was on my calendar. But as we talked about earlier, the tendency for information to outpace implementation, I also blocked out time, more time than I was consuming information, to implement. And, excuse me, I set a block on my calendar for every single Thursday to submit all of my questions, concerns, or where I was confused. And I put in that note where they were going. It was very clear because I was in a course, so I knew who the facilitator was and I was going to send my questions. But instead of like, I'll figure it out, or I should know this, or I'm going to Google it and then getting even more frustrated, it was on this day at this time, I'm going to submit all my questions. That time was blocked, as was the information consumption and the implementation. And then circling back on the feedback and taking action on the feedback was also on my calendar. I encourage clients in my consistency course to do the same thing. And I encourage you to do it as well. But the way that I teach it in the consistency course is I want you to block time on your calendar for any information that you take in here. Our live coaching calls, going through the guides section, reviewing a tool that's specific to something you're working on. Block it on your calendar. Don't just have it be an intention. How often do we just have the intention to do something, but we don't do it, right? Then make sure that as much time as going into consuming information is going to implementation. Block it on your calendar. Don't just hope you remember to do it. And have a process for making note of, hey, I ran into this excuse. This was the exception that I made. This seems to be a barrier. I'm trying to do this, but what I'm running into is this. And then when are you going to ask those questions? And who are you going to ask? What is the process? For my clients, they might ask in the Facebook group. They might email me privately. They might ask before a coaching call. They might ask on a coaching call. They might, post it in the Facebook group. There's a number of different things that they can do, but have that in place so that you don't remain in the, I'm a wallflower, I'm here, kind of tuned in, but kind of checked out, or I started off tuned in and now I'm checked out. Know thyself and build a feedback loop for yourself. Mimi says, I'm becoming more able to spot the moment when I'm renegotiating. I think you mentioned this on a podcast. That word really speaks to me. The feedback is I have a standard for something / notice the attempt to negotiate, recognize that is mentally exhausting and not worth it. I love that. And Mimi, what I would add to that is some kind of accountability, right? Like, how are you measuring, monitoring? Where are you going if you run into barriers? Like, what's your process if you are struggling to implement or not making the progress that you want to make, or those different types of things. So you want to have a feedback loop. The last piece of the consistency code that you must do, that everybody wants to skip because we want to, like, tell me what to do, is upgrade your operating system. I tell my clients all the time that I would be a billionaire if I could have a plug and play. First you do this, and then you do this. On day one, you do this. On day two, you do this. If I could have that kind of a system for becoming consistent and overcoming your excuses, I would be a billionaire. But it doesn't work like that, and here's why. Number one, every one of us is different. Every one of us has different excuses, and we respond to different tools and resources. That's why there's like hundreds and hundreds of resources in the consistency course, because different situations and circumstances are different, not only inherently different, but different in how individuals interpret them. But the big reason that there is no step 1A, do this, on day 2, do this, is because 98% of it flows from how you think. You can go through the first steps and say, this is what done looks like. I did what Elizabeth said. I was painfully specific. I broke it down into 30 different pieces. I decided to start with one. I assigned my feedback loop. And then you say, I'll start tomorrow. I'll start when the kids go back to school. You have to upgrade your mind. So many of us are running an outdated operating system, and we're wondering why we keep running into errors, why the system keeps bugging out, why we still keep making excuses, because we have to upgrade our mindset. Now, I just decided this last night. So nobody knows this. What I did that you guys are going to get is I recorded a separate training on 10 mindset upgrades you have to make in order to build the skill of consistency. I recorded that separately because it's like a 40-minute training. You guys are going to get that. I'm going to email it to you this week for sure. I just finished it today, so I just got to do a couple things and get it out to you. So you guys are going to get that just for being here. What I want to do tonight before I dive into your questions, and please do not hesitate, put your questions in there. We are going to get to them. I always make sure that I carve out time for that because it's incredibly important to me. But what I wanted to do is give you some examples of what do I mean when I say you have to upgrade your mindset, because I think people can understand it intellectually. Like, yeah, if I'm regularly making excuses, I do have to think about things differently. The rub is where people experience friction is, how the hell do I do that? Right? Like, I get it. I agree with you, Elizabeth, but it seems like these thoughts are just running in the background. I don't feel like I'm consciously choosing them the way I'm consciously choosing a cookie from the pantry. So how do I do it? I'm going to give you a few examples, and these are of the 10 shifts that I'm going to send you in that free video training. I've picked out just a few of them that I want to go through tonight before we get into your questions. This first one we talked about recently on the podcast, and it is desire doesn't necessitate action. How often do we feel like my cravings were just too out of control, or I was just ravenously hungry and I couldn't help myself, or I was just so angry that I didn't even care anymore? Desire doesn't necessitate action. The good news here is you not only already know this, you already live this in many areas of your life. So I've often desire to scream, shut up in my house. And I say that with love. I'm not a bad mom. I promise I don't yell, shut up. But you know, when you feel that like overstimulated, there's too much going on. My twins are almost 1. Roman is 2. I've got a very large dog. We've got chickens and roosters and goats. And my husband is the most like big personality ever. And there are times when like everybody's losing their mind and I want to lose mine. And I have the desire to just scream, shut up. And I don't, because desire doesn't necessitate action. I practice that as a mom all the time. So I have that capacity when it comes to the very intense and feeling of urgency around a craving, right? Something that I want to remind everybody, sometimes, in fact, do it just right now. Take a second and fully inhale and fully exhale and really allow your shoulders to relax. Allow your traps to relax. The reason that that is important is because sometimes we get so tense in response to desires that run counter to our goals. Whether that is sleeping in and you're judging yourself because you don't want to get up when you said you would, or you really, really have that intense craving for wine or chocolate or ice cream and you said you would do well. One of the most powerful things we can do to really step into this mindset upgrade of desire not necessitating action is relax. And imagine that I'm inserting the F word between re and lax. Chill. Chill. I am always encouraged when I remind myself that that fever pitch desire of all I want is ice cream, I want it so bad, or whatever it is, spending money, alcohol, tobacco, you name it, it doesn't stay peaked. That feeling and the intensity of the feeling, it never stays peaked. It will come back down. So sometimes the practice is just riding that wave. It feels like a 10 right now, but let me just check in 10 minutes and see if it still feels like a 10. Let me go have a drink of water, take my supplements. I teach my clients to like build an anti-funk folder that are the things that really reinvigorate you and bring you back to your many reasons or inspire you or fire you up. Could be any number of things, right? Check that out, come back, see where it's at. I gave myself a really great practice in this many years ago when I was doing a 7-day water fast. Don't do a 7-day water fast, please. It's not something I recommend for the masses. But anyway, my primary concern going into it was that I was going to be so hungry, I wouldn't be able to take it, right? And I wouldn't be able to get through it. So what I did was I would rate my hunger, that hunger pang, on a scale of 1 to 10. And I was just really curious about what would happen. Would I start at a 2 and then it would go to a 4 and then it would climb to a 9 and I would just be at a 9 for 7 days, miserable and feeling like my body was eating itself from the inside out? The answer is no, it didn't happen. It never just climbed and climbed and climbed endlessly. It always came back down, just like anger comes back down. And that's a practice that I am always working on in my marriage. If my anger or my irritation or my frustration feels like a 10 right now, before I say anything, before I do anything, before I react, before I engage, let me check back in with how intense it is in 5 minutes. 99% of the time, I am not lying to you. 99% of the time, it has come down in 5 minutes. So learn to just wait it out. You're not necessarily telling yourself no. You're just building in a little bit of a time buffer and being willing to experiment with what happens to this feeling. Before we move on to the next one, which is probably my favorite one, Holly asked, is there a way to build momentum by acknowledging your positive choices? Your idea of how many wins can I get by XYZ has really helped me. Yeah, that is the way, right? That is an example of a way to build momentum by acknowledging your positive choices. Keep a list of your wins, see how many you can get today. And then you're not, it doesn't matter if you had the cookie or you skipped the workout because you're not paying attention to what you didn't do or what you wouldn't count as a win. You're just trying to see how many wins you can get. You're trying to see if you can get 15 wins before you go to bed, if you can get 10 wins before you leave for work in the morning. So that is the example of how you could do that, Holly. Robin says, what is the difference between balance and consistency? I always say that I want balance, but I wonder what is the relationship with consistency? That's a really great question, Robin. And I think that it would come down to how you as an individual define those things and the context, right? Because you and I would probably define them differently. This is an example of where I always say in the consistency course, it probably comes up multiple times a week, is you have to be specific. If I were you trying to answer this question, what I think would be a great thing for you to do is say, well, what is balance? How do I define balance? And how do I define consistency? And then get specific. So what I'm really wanting to know, and I'm just making up an example here, Robin, what I really want to know is, what is the difference between balance with food and consistency with food? Well, what do I call balance and what do I call consistency? So I don't know what those words mean to you. When I think about food, I don't think about balance. I think about what my ideal is. And that goes back to, what does done look like? For me, what done looks like, the way that I can envision living my life that aligns with my goals and also allows for some foods that I just find purely pleasurable, is indulging a couple times a month. And 90% of the time, or 95% of the time, it is foods that fit within the categories for me of meat, vegetables, fruit, little bit of nuts and seeds. So to me, balance doesn't really come into play there because of how clearly defined my ideal is. And then I'm pursuing consistency of the application of that ideal. So the next one that is an example of these required mindset shifts for consistency. And again, I'm going to send out this training for you on 10 mindset shifts to make for lifelong consistency that doesn't feel like a punishment, is this notion that the conversation is the relationship. This comes from a book called Fierce Conversations. It's written by Susan Scott. And it has nothing to do with food or business or money. In fact, it's mostly about other people, but it applies beautifully to ourselves. In the context of other people, it means that in, say, your marriage, the conversation is the relationship. Everything, whether we're talking about intimacy or a feeling of closeness or security, flows from the conversation. If I look at a day of conversation between myself and my husband, and it's 90%, Charlie needs a diaper change, Piper needs a bottle, Roman needs a nap at XYZ, this is what they're going to have for lunch, the relationship reflects that that's how our conversations go. But if our conversations largely reflect like, you hanging in there? I really appreciate you. What can we do today to spend some time together? The relationship flows from the conversation. This is as true, most true, in our relationship with ourselves. So whether we're talking about money, or we're talking about fitness, or we're talking about food, the conversation you have about those things with yourself and also with other people is the relationship that you have. So if you have a super jacked up relationship with food, I guarantee you have super jacked up conversations with yourself about food. Like, I'm so stressed, I don't even care. I'm going to get the ice cream to calm me down or relax me or make me feel better. The relationship you have with food flows from those kinds of conversations. The conversations that are, I'll start tomorrow, this one thing won't hurt, I'm going to get it out of my system. Those conversations need to be improved and upgraded. And when you do that, the relationship is improved and upgraded. And it all is about having better, more honest, less dramatic, more thoughtful, more calm conversations with ourselves. This next one is one that I really love to practice, and it is a challenge for me. And I seek out as many opportunities to practice, which fortunately I make a lot of mistakes, but also with my 2-year-old, I practice this. Transform mistakes with initiation. So often our response to mistakes is judgment and or shame. Why did I do that? What is wrong with me? I'm so disappointed in myself. I was doing so well. I really dropped the ball. But we do not have to stop and look backwards and judge. We can see this mistake as an opportunity to do something fresh, turn a page, start something brand new, respond in a new way. And this reminds me of another one that I really love, which is transform your relationship with problems, upgrade your relationship with problems. We can transform a mistake with the act of initiating something new. So a silly example is my girls, my twins, have these little like puff things, these little organic puff things that come in this tall tube. And my 2-year-old loves to get the tube and dump it all out. So instead of being like, no, Roman, we don't do that, buddy, that's not nice. That is reflecting on the behavior and judgment. I see it as a blank slate. Let's transform the mistake with initiation. Roman, go get your dump truck. Or not your dump truck, your garbage truck. It has a little toy garbage truck. Go get your garbage truck. That's what this is for, right? Let's put these in the garbage truck. We transform mistakes with initiation, and we can do this in our own lives by approaching the mistake, not turning around and being judgmental and chiding ourselves, but what can I do with this? How can I change this? How can I create something good from this? Wanda just asked a great question. What if you don't realize you're having a conversation with yourself? Well, it starts with you always are. We all always are. It's running in the background. So we have talked about so many different tools on the podcast and the consistency course to be more present with yourself as you do this. Journaling is one way, not multitasking is another way. Asking yourself questions is another way. I just put up a free resource on my Instagram for, I don't know, it's like 120 or some odd free questions to ask yourself. You can use any or all of those approaches to be more aware, to tap in, to be present for the conversations. But here's the deal. They're always happening. And even if you're not aware of the ones going on in the background, you can initiate conversation with yourself at any time. And the more that you talk to yourself, the more that you're aware of how you talk to yourself. So a fourth strategy there would be initiate more conversations with yourself, be in more conversation. It's a great way to get to know yourself. And the better that you know yourself, the more aware you're going to be of things that are happening beneath the surface. One of the questions that came in here is around, like, how does this work within the consistency course? Like, okay, you're teaching these things, but how do you actually help me if I were to go through the consistency course? And there's a couple of ways. I was actually just talking about this earlier today when I was on I was training inside my friend's mastermind. And I said, after I put together resources like motivation must-haves and a cheat sheet for evening eating and different things like that, that I just knew were really desirable for people that I work with, you know, how to get yourself out of a funk, how do you get yourself back on track faster? After I had created those resources in video form or cheat sheet form, I stepped back and I asked myself, if somebody came into this and they were not successful, why? And I think that's a great question to ask yourself of yourself, especially if you're a business owner. Ask it of your clients, but ask it of yourself. If I were to do this and not be successful, why? Because then you can strategize for those things. And one of the first things that came to mind for me was overwhelm. Somebody could come in and they could see hundreds of resources and feel like, I don't even know where to begin. So I put in place the intake form where you come in, you tell me your goals, you tell me your most common excuses, you any reservations or fears or anything like that. And I respond with a personalized video on this is where I want you to start, which is different from the last person who had different context. So I make it really clear when you come in, you're not having to focus on 27,000 different ideas or options or things running through your head or resources that are available. We make that really clear. In my opinion, one of the most powerful pieces is the coaching, right? We do coaching calls right now. We're doing them every single week. They had been twice a month, but hey, look, we all need more support, right? And I constantly almost beg people to ask, bring your questions about what you struggled with this week. Bring the questions about where you feel stuck. Successful people ask for help. And that is the opportunity to say, hey, I've been trying to implement this thing and this is where I'm feeling stuck. And we work through that together because, guys, yes, you can do it by yourself, but it is way harder. It is way harder when you can go every single week and say, like, this is where I tripped up. This is what I'm struggling with. I'm trying to do X, but I keep making this mistake, or I'm getting stuck on this part. And you can get specific feedback and tools and resources for that thing. I think it is the most valuable thing in the world, right? Stephanie just commented and said, I go back and listen to my note from you every other day to keep me focused. I love that. And that is such a great way to use the tool, right? I want people to go back to these different resources and listen over and over and over and over again, because we need that. Because as I said at the start of this, we retain very little information. And so we need those resources. But that is really a big way that it's not just about, oh, here are the resources at your fingertips. I think that that is important. Curated resources around how do I slow down and pay attention to what's going on in my mind? How do I handle moments when I feel really unmotivated? How do I fit this in when I have a lack of time? But in my opinion, what we really need is a place to show up and say, this is what didn't work this week, or this is the mistake that I'm wrestling with most, or this is the excuse that I keep finding myself making, and getting specific, personalized recommendations and tools and resources for you, for that thing. Because what happens when we don't have that is we dive into the vastness that is all of the podcasts on all of the topics and all of the books, and we're trying to sift through this ocean of information. And then we get distracted. What were we even here for? What are we trying to do? We're off trying to start some new thing. And so the ability to have clarity and direction and focus and personalization, I always feel like one of the top two things that I can invest in my life is making me better. Because when I make me better, I'm a better mom. I have more energy. I'm better in my business. My marriage benefits from that. I'm better with my money. I make better decisions. Like everything improves with that. Everything. So to me, that's kind of where I see the primary value. Wanda said, I feel really supported in the group. I don't see how you do it, but I love how you're always available to answer any questions. I take it really seriously, and I have a lot of passion for it, because for a long time I felt super lost and I felt super overwhelmed. And if I'm being really truthful, I felt hopeless. I felt like it wasn't going to be possible for me. And I had a lot of shame around my behaviors, and I wasn't willing to ask for help. And I truly believe in my gut that you can give yourself the biggest competitive advantage in the world if you decide that you will be someone who asks for help, not asks everyone for help, right? But you pick a path and you remain committed on it, and you set yourself a schedule for asking for help. I tell people all the time, I'm in my season of asking for help because I think that it is a shortcut. I know that it is a shortcut. Anonymous said, is it possible to reset ourselves when we are in an information black hole, where we've been in a pattern of consuming so much information, all the different plans, but haven't spent time working on implementation, and now we just feel overwhelmed? Yeah. The way that I would recommend, obviously, is the process that I just outlined here. I want you to do this. I'm not just sharing it with you so that you have more information. I genuinely want to do this. Start with, what does done look like? Pick a goal, right? You don't have to begin with what done looks like for everything, but a specific goal. Go through the process that we've been talking about for the last hour, this first, then segmenting, create your feedback loop, and then work on your mindset. That is the path. That is literally what we are discussing here tonight. The answer is absolutely 100% yes. I have done it. My clients have done it. I teach it every single day. I coach on it every single week. That is what I do. Absolutely yes. I am shocked that we got through. Was I talking super fast like the Micro Machine Man? I thought that this was going to take a whole lot longer to get through, but you guys have just been amazing, and there haven't been a ton of questions, and I'm glad we've been able to get to them. If you are on here live, there are a lot of you on here live. What questions do you guys have? What can I help with? I am genuinely here for you. I would love to work with you. I would love to have you in the consistency course. I would love to consider myself your resource and have you in that container where you can bring your questions and your frustrations and your excuses, and this is how this week went, and this is what I need help with. I would love that. But I also know that maybe that's not the right fit for you right now. And so in the time that we have tonight, if you have a question, throw it in there. I want to help you right now. So Angela says, can you take one example through the 3 steps? Sure. So it's 4, right? Just so everybody's clear. What does done look like? Segment your vision into phases. create a feedback loop, and then upgrade your mindset. So it's tough to take it through all of them because it takes a lot of time, right? I can generalize it, but this is not something that is done in 5 minutes. This is something that's going to probably take you an hour or more to do. So using food as an example, I can tell you what done looks like for me with food, but I'd have to really generalize it here. In addition to defining it generally, I'd probably create 5, 6, 7, 8 example days so that I have true specificity and so that it's easier to do this segmented phase. We would be here for well over an hour if we were going to break it down and workshop it and break it into pieces. But like for me with food, what done looks like is kind of what I alluded to earlier of 90 to 95% of the time, I'm eating meat, veggies, fruit, tiny bit of nuts and seeds. Then that 5-ish% of the time is everything else. That's my spicy margaritas, it's my ice cream, etc. Then I break it down and I have example days. I'll give you just what today looked like. I started with a protein smoothie. And if I were my 350-pound self, I would be specifying this. Like, these are some sample days when I'm out to eat, sample days when it's my birthday, sample days when it's my twin's birthday, sample days when it's a random Tuesday and there's nothing going on, that all fall within this 95% of the time I eat like this, 5% of the time I eat like this. And this is what it looks like. So I would detail that out. So this morning it was the protein smoothie. Lunch, I had leftover cod cakes over a salad. A little bit later in the day after a workout, I had a nectarine. And then dinner was spaghetti squash, meat sauce, marinara, and a little bit of cheese on top. My workout was intervals on the treadmill and some deadlifts. And I would have sample days and then I would segment it into phases. And that process depends a lot on my baseline, right? But you want to break it into as many pieces as possible. You probably are going to want to listen to this training multiple times so that you can put things together. Creating the feedback loop would look like, if I needed to learn something about my process, or if I needed to calendar things like food prep or grocery shopping or meal plan, all of that on my calendar, keeping a list. When am I jotting down? When in the day am I going to be jotting down my frustrations, my confusions, my excuses, the excuses that are rising up that I'm trying to talk myself out of things? And then what am I doing with those? Who am I reporting those to? Who am I meeting with to help me through those? That sort of process. And then we just gave some of the examples of the mindset stuff. Crystal wants to know, how do I decide the first thing to start on? I would look at what you feel like has the biggest return on investment. There is no right or wrong. You just need to pick. I would rather you pick something that doesn't have the biggest return than spend a month pondering what you should start on. It's more important than you start than on you pick the right thing to start with, because there really is no right thing. You're going to get to them. Tina said, your generosity and focus is astounding, and I'm so grateful. Well, that's really sweet. I appreciate it. Cheryl says, when you think about the feedback loop, are you only asking yourself for feedback or others, or does it depend on the situation? It depends on the situation. So for example, right now in my marriage, I have a feedback loop that's just for me, right? Theoretically, it could be for your husband or your spouse or whatever, but I have a feedback loop process within my marriage where I have a calendared time. It's not a ton of time. It's like 20 minutes a week, but it's on my calendar where I take in some kind of marriage resource. Could be a podcast, could be a book, could be, some blog that I saved one time, so that I'm not getting distracted by like trying to take in that information all the time, or what should I listen to? Like, there's a time when I listen to that. And then I have a blocked item on my calendar. It's at a time when I know my kids are in bed, so it's not like I'm changing diapers and can't do it. Where right now for me, I am saying one appreciation to my husband every single day, right? That is a time when I know that I'm awake, when I know that we're not, it's time when we're like likely to be awake at home and not doing things with the kids. And then I have this time where I journal through, and I am basically presenting to myself to change stories around any, like, I didn't want to do it, he's dick. Like, I'm working through that. But then I have other things like my trainer or business coaches where that feedback loop process is with somebody else. So it absolutely depends. Lucy says, how long should I stick with one step before I know I'm being consistent? I get this question a ton. And unfortunately, as with many of these things, there's no magic number. It's not like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, because some changes take a lot more time and some people are less consistent and therefore it takes more time. Generally speaking, the smaller the degree of change and the greater the consistency, the faster you can build. But here's the thing, if you're unsure, like I'm feeling like I should add, but I don't really know, go ahead and try it. You can always take it away. But this is something you're going to kind of learn as you go. There is no magic number. Stasia says, what if you're overwhelmed already with so many programs? Well, that's a choice, right? Because what you're doing is you're keeping your mind open to options and you can just choose. You can decide to make a decision. I remember I was really struggling with a decision not that long ago. It was a few months ago. And I was talking about it with somebody in my mastermind. And she said, what's exhausting is not the options. It's the fact that you're still entertaining them all. There's going to be upsides and downsides no matter what you choose. So you just need to exercise the discipline of choose and move on. Sarah says, should we do the 4 steps for each area of our lives that we want to prioritize? I don't think you should move on. I don't think you should act on them all simultaneously. No, but I do think that the process can apply to anything. But I would say, especially if you're starting out, work on only one area of your life at a time. That does not mean that all of a sudden you decide to get divorced because you can't work on your marriage because you decided to focus on your health. You're still doing the maintenance behaviors, but you're not disproportionately investing in improving more than one area. Samantha says, how does your course work? What is included? So what is included is I initially mail out a consistency calendar. It's a visual tool for tracking consistency because so many people are visual and it's very hard without it to really see how it's going for you. So I created this custom consistency calendar. I mail that out to you. The coaching with me is at least twice a month. And that is for 2 years, right? Initially, it was lifetime. We've changed things because the fact that people could get involved and have coaching with me like indefinitely was just bonkers and not an intelligent design on my part. And then there's literally hundreds of specific resources. I already gave some examples of what those look like. And I add resources every single week. So resources around specific excuses. I'll start tomorrow. Resources around limitations and circumstances in your life. Like I really feel limited in my time. Resources around stories you tell yourself, like overwhelm. So there's a ton of resources, but go back to where I talked about 10 minutes or so ago about the coaching piece and how insanely valuable it is to have a space where you can say, hey, this is what I'm working on. This is what I tried to do. I got this result. It's not the result I wanted. What do you suggest I change? The resource of being able to say, I'm trying to implement this behavior, but I've been making this excuse. What do you recommend? What tools do you have? That is priceless. Heather says, I find that I get overwhelmed with wanting to make changes and become indecisive on paths I want to take in terms of organization, nutrition, fitness. I know I should just pick one and go, but then I get overwhelmed and anxious that I'm choosing the wrong path. As I see it, there's 1,000 ways to lose weight. There's 1,000 ways to get organized. There's 1,000 ways to get rich. There's 1,000,000 ways to build a business. The problem isn't that people are picking the wrong ones. The problem is that they're bouncing back and forth among them. So I think that you just have to tell a different story when you have those thoughts arising of like, I picked the wrong one. This isn't an issue of there being too many options. This isn't an issue of picking right or wrong. This is an issue about the story you tell yourself. And for me, I say, I can make it win on any of them. This is why it matters so much to get clear on what done looks like. Because like I said, knowing what done looks like for me nutritionally and knowing what done looks like for me business-wise disqualifies 98% of the strategies out there because they don't fit in my definition of done. Tracy says, what format do you use to organize all the info? What info are you asking about? She says, digital or notebook? What, are you talking about the info in the consistency course? Are you talking about going through this process? When I'm like journaling, I really like paper. So if I were going through the initial brainstorm of what done looks like, I'd probably do it on paper first. I might eventually then move it into like a Notion folder or something. If you're asking about the consistency course, all of that is in a private Facebook group, and it's all organized inside different, what we call guides. It's a new functionality on Facebook for groups. And the reason I did that, I've done courses over the last 9 years that lived on another platform, but the problem was then people had to remember to go check out that platform. Whereas most people have a Facebook account and are regularly checking Facebook. So compliance tends to be a lot higher that way. Val says, I had been successful changing my mindset and losing a significant amount of weight. Over the past 6 months, I've returned to an unhelpful mindset. This won't matter. You deserve it. How do I get back on track? I would suggest going through this process, and you get the, this is a perfect example of the conversation is the relationship. When the conversation is this won't matter and you deserve it, then the choices reflect that conversation. You get to have different conversations. When you think this won't matter, you get to say what won't matter. Use this tool of specificity that we've talked about a few times. What is it that won't matter? Why won't it matter? Is that true? What else is true? What am I leaving out? Go through this process and then have better conversations with yourself about those things, but especially go through this process. Danielle says, when defining your phases, are you setting timelines, example, number of days or weeks? No, here's why. I don't know how long it's going to take for a specific change to feel routine and easier, right? Because that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for it to feel fluid and to not have resistance. Sometimes that happens really fast. Sometimes it doesn't. That's why the feedback loop is really helpful. So you can kind of check in with yourself. Like, is there something I need to change? Do I need to maybe break this into smaller pieces? Do I feel ready to add? Tracy said, coaching info, what the consistency course group is like, cost, time, etc. Can I find all of this on your website? Yeah. So let me, I don't want to do that. Hold on. Let me pull up the link right now. 2023. I'm going to drop it in the chat. I should be able to put something in the chat, even though you guys can't. Although I am running the risk of, shoot, I want to move this note. One second, y'all. All right, let me see. Oh, sorry, guys. All right, I just dropped it in there and it's in the chat. So you guys should be good there. All right. Brenda says the consistency calendar tool, that's what I mail out when you get started, is an awesome tool, and the calls with EB are priceless. The other tools, calls, etc., are also great. The course is life-changing. Thank you, Brenda. I really appreciate that. Ashley said, what is the name of the book and author you referenced? Susan Scott is the author, and the book is called Fierce Conversations. Stasia says, thank you for the mic drop. You're welcome. Tracy says, is the coaching group or individual? That's a great question. So with the restructure, the coaching is group. And here's why that is amazing. I wish somebody had told me this a long time ago. I used to really strongly prefer one-on-one. And I'm so glad I changed that. And let me tell you why. I didn't know this until I knew this. So you might not have been exposed to this perspective, and I'm excited to share it. What I have learned by being in other programs and other masterminds is a lot of times I don't know what to ask or how to communicate, or maybe I'm just embarrassed, right? And people ask questions that I'm like, oh, shoot, me too, right? Or even if I don't struggle with that thing, the answer was like, oh my gosh, that answer unlocked something for me. So it's like, if you could get 2 units of value from one-on-one with me because we're talking about your stuff, you can get 2,000 units of value from the group scenario because you're not only getting to address what your question was, but you are getting to benefit from everybody else's. So it is accelerative. Is that a word? I think it should be a word. It accelerates your growth and your learning in a way that is like, I will never go back. Holly says, is there a way to search your podcast for a certain topic? Kind of. She says dopamine, probably not going to find one on that. So the reason I say kind of is because for the first like 5-6 years of the podcast, I did show notes. I don't do show notes anymore. I just do the little descriptions that you see in whatever app you listen to. So if it's something that I covered in the first 5 years, what I do is I go to Google. This is exactly what I do. And I tell people this is exactly what I do. So if you're looking to search, this is the best way to do it. Go to Google, type in the Google search bar, primalpotential.com/ whatever your search is. Then it's basically searching in the first 5 years of show notes or whatever, but you can't really search that way for the last few years. Tracy says, I like the group idea. I can totally see the benefit of that. Yeah, like I looked down on group coaching for the longest time until I had enough experience with it to realize I get 1,000 times better because of the questions other people ask and the answers given to other people that I never would have heard because I wouldn't have asked that question. So I wouldn't have gotten exposed to that tool or that shift or that mindset because I didn't ask that question, you know? And so I just am obsessed with that format now. And it's so much better for everybody. Now, that's not to say that you have to ask your question and put yourself on blast. A lot of people ask questions anonymously and their names are ever out there, and you can email me, right? If you can email me and say like, I don't want this to be included in our coaching call, but was hoping you could answer XYZ. And in all Facebook groups, you can post questions anonymously. So it never has to be like Tracy wants to know, it's not like that. So there are certainly ways to have that benefit of the group exposure without feeling like you're putting yourself out there with some personal struggle that you don't want to identify with. So any other questions from you guys? I dropped that link to the consistency course in the chat for the person who asked for it. So that is there. Any other questions, y'all? I am really committed to being here to support you right now. So I just want to make sure before we jump off, and hopefully I'm able to capture the replay, that I address any questions. We'll give it another couple of minutes because I always hate to be like, okay, it doesn't look like there's anybody. And then I always imagine that there's somebody who's like furiously typing and it just hit send as I end the call. And I never want to be that girl. I never want to do that to you. So let me know if you have any other questions, but also you can email me, right? If you're thinking like, oh, I'm on the fence about the consistency course, I don't know if it's right for me, Elizabeth@primalpotential.com. Nobody else sees my emails. I'm the only one. You're not going to get some response from an admin. If you want to say like, here's my concern, or is it right for me because I have X, Y, and Z to factor in, I'm always super honest. If you've ever worked with me, you would know, but if you haven't, you wouldn't. So let me tell you, I am not a pushy salesperson. For a very selfish reason. I don't want to work with anybody that doesn't want to work with me. Like that sucks. So as selfish as that is, it's just very, very, very honest. I don't want to convince anybody to work with me because it would suck to work with somebody that doesn't want to work with me. Brenda wants to know if there's a senior rate. No. And the reason for that is I just will keep my business super simple. No coupon codes, no discount rates, because then it's like, well, what about teachers? What about veterans? What about this? What about that? Like the price is the price is the price. And that's the way it is. Anonymous. What if you wonder if you can do what you want done to look like? That's okay. But there's a piece of done that you can do to start with. A lot of times we feel like we have to believe in the whole picture. No, you don't, right? I didn't know for sure that I could write a book, but I knew for sure that I could do a brain dump of like dumb ideas. I didn't know if I could bring a book to market, but I knew that I could do an outline, right? That's why we break it into pieces, not only for actionability, but the thing that we forget is that we change as we make progress. We change as we make progress. So we're not who we are today when we're 6 baby steps in, right? We're more confident, we're more capable, we have momentum. Belief is not a prerequisite for this. Debbie said, can you please repeat your email address? I sure can. Elizabeth@primalpotential.com. Super simple. Elizabeth@primalpotential.com. Mimi said, I'm delighted to have joined the consistency course. One immediate benefit, you're not alone anymore. That is so true, Mimi. That's a really great point. Lisa says, is the coaching available evening or weekends, or is it during the day? It's usually evenings, but we do rotate because we have people all over the globe and people with different like work schedules, but it is recorded. And not only do you get the replays, if you were to join today, you'd get the archive of like, I don't know, 50 or some odd other coaching calls that we have done. So you get infinite learning that you weren't even a paid member for, which I think is freaking phenomenal. But I prefer like Monday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. That works best for me, but I do rotate it around because we have people in the UK and in Australia and people who work nights and different things like that. So we rotate it, but I will say this, the majority of people are not on live. They submit their questions ahead of time because maybe they have to jump off or they have to work or they have something else going on. And it really doesn't matter if you're physically there for it in real time because you can submit your question ahead of time and the replay is available. So that's a really great question. We do try to rotate it around just because we have people with different schedules and time zones that we want to accommodate. All right, y'all, it looks like those are the only questions. Anne says, thank you so much. Very informative. I'm really glad that you were here. I appreciate you guys spending some time with me tonight. All things going well, I will send out a replay probably tomorrow. And then it'll be the day after that I send out that bonus training on the 10 mindset upgrades that you can make. If you have questions or you want to talk about something more personally, email me, Elizabeth@primalpotential.com. Otherwise, I'm going to go check on my little sick kiddo and I will see you guys a little bit later. Take care.